Hi everyone, it's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. Did you know that it costs me money to produce each episode of this podcast? I'd really appreciate your help to keep my show on the air and helping other people. Please join me over on Patreon, where you can also find commercial-free episodes, and the links are in the show notes. Thanks so much. Hi everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. Philip Moss is my guest today. Phil grew up in a small midwestern ultra-conservative farming community and a very old-school Reformed church tradition. After which, he attended a conservative Christian college for 4 years, worked for 2 years in a Christian-based rehab center in education, then spent 7 years with the Campus Crusade for Christ cult. Some of us do think it's kind of culty. Prior to obtaining his master's degree in counseling psychology at a Southern Baptist Seminary in Denver. Then within 1 year, Phil left religion and the church. In his own words, he has been in a deconstruction mode for the last 32 years. Phil has been a licensed professional counselor / therapist and administrator for over 30 years and is currently transitioning to a focus on religious deconstruction and spiritual healing. He's a certified guided meditation facilitator and uses meditation, mindfulness, cognitive mindfulness, and inner child healing to support his clients. Welcome, Phil. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you, Janice. It's good to be here.
And where are you joining us from? You're still in the United States right now, I think.
Yeah. So my wife and I grew up in Iowa. That's the small midwestern community we grew up in. We were high school sweethearts. We actually left when we were in our early 20s and spent, I'll tell you more about my journey as we go, but we spent over 40 years in Colorado. And a year ago, I kind of semi-retired, although I'm still working 4 days a week. But we moved to a desert community in Mesquite, Nevada. So that's where we live now. And so we're in a condo here and really enjoying the kind of the change of pace. And I'm in Nevada now. So.
Amazing. That just seems like such a huge difference to go from Colorado to Mesquite, Nevada. Is it a town? Is it a city?
It's a city of about 25,000 people. Mm-hmm. We're right on the border by Arizona and Utah. St. George, Utah is a city of around 100,000. That's 35 miles from us. And then we're about 75 miles from Las Vegas.
Oh, so if you got a big weekend, you can go to the city if that's what you want to do. I'm wondering are you noticing an uptick in Mormon clients? I ask just because you're near a Utah border now.
Yeah. Well, I'm currently doing a telehealth platform and I'm licensed in Colorado.
I see.
Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing clients as a therapist, a licensed professional therapist,
Gotcha.
And most of them are Colorado, although that also allows me to do international. So as a therapist, I've had clients from Canada, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Australia.
Amazing.
Most of them are Colorado, though. And, now I'm trying to transition. I just launched my website, peaceandcontentmentcoaching.com. And I'm really wanting to transition out of the therapist hat into more of a coaching hat with the specialty of deconstruction from religion.
Love it. There's such a huge need for that right now, as people are waking up to the fact that, oh, you know what? My religion actually was traumatizing and I need some help picking apart all the conditioning. Would you please tell us a little bit about the 7 years spent with Campus Crusade for Christ? Because that is such an intense organization.
Yeah. um, well, let me preface it. So I kind of divide my first 35 years of my life was in the small town conservative church, in Iowa. My high school graduation class was 33 students. So it was almost this, part of it was this idyllic farm, growing up on a farm with pigs and cows and horses, and a lot of, very positive memories from that. Then I went to the Christian college only 8 miles from home for 4 years. And then, so the Campus Crusade for Christ piece came in when I was started in my early to really mid-20s. And I was with them for 7 years. But part of my background related to that is that I'm an athlete. And I'm 6 feet 10 inches tall.
Wow, I never would have guessed. Okay.
And so I was a star basketball player, and really a 3 or 4 sport athlete in high school, and then the college years were spent playing small college basketball. I have a story behind that as well. But the Campus Crusade organization had a division or a branch called Athletes in Action.
I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think they still exist. I just looked them up the other day. I think maybe they have split away from Campus Crusade, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so my first break from Northwest Iowa was my wife and I. We were high school sweethearts, and we got married while I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a preacher's kid.
Oh, boy.
So there's a lot to my story. But
yeah.
But we moved from Iowa to Abbotsford, British Columbia.
I know Abbotsford.
And Campus Crusade for Christ had an Athletes in Action basketball team located in Abbotsford. I guess it was all United States basketball players, but we all migrated there. And I was on that team for 1 year. I guess they felt that there were a lot of heathens in Canada that needed.
I contribute to that, yeah.
That needed Jesus. And so, but that experience really got me out of this sheltered Christian atmosphere. Campus Crusade obviously was even more radical than what I grew up with. But I went there a lot to keep playing basketball and to travel the world. It took me to 15 different countries.
Wow.
Back then, this was in the early 1980s, early to mid 80s. And so the Iron Curtain had not come down yet. So it was a really, really big kind of Christian ego thing to say, hey, we're going to take Jesus into the communist bloc. And so I was in Russia, Lithuania, Latvia, Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and then a lot of Western Europe as well. And so we would do things like smuggle, pamphlets and Bibles.
But Brother Andrew, yep. Remembering God Smuggler, yep.
Yeah. And so that was, a big part of what I did there. And it was all about, each of us as basketball players, when we joined, we went through this intensive 6-week training with more Bible, more, it really reminded me of being a salesman, like a commissioned salesman, but we had the 4 spiritual laws. God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. Law number 2, but you're a wretched sinner. You're sinful and separated from God. Therefore, the 3rd law was, well, good news, Jesus died for you to save you from your sins. And the 4th law was, you just have to accept Jesus as your Savior. And then, would you like to pray with me? Right?
Wow.
And so, to accept Jesus. So we memorized all of that along with a 3-minute testimony, that we would get up at the halftime of a basketball game and take a microphone and share our 3-minute testimony about how Jesus had changed our life.
Yeah.
So that was, and then, so I did that for 1 year, and then for 6 years, they recruited me. They had a international headquarters for the sports ministry in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Of course.
That's how I ended up in Colorado for 40 years.
Yes.
So for 6 years, I was the director of basketball operations, and I recruited young college-age Christian basketball players to go on 6-week summer adventures all over the world. And I set up training camps. I coordinated all of the competition, and my wife was kind of an assistant to me. Of course, it was a very chauvinistic organization.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm wondering, you grew up really pretty much steeped in religion then, in a Reformed tradition. And then you went to work in a ministry, went to Bible college and went to work in a ministry. Along the way, did you ever have doubts, or did that not happen until much later?
Yeah. So what I wanted to kind of share was this involves what I say is my inner child. So I tell this story. It's probably one of my earliest memories was from when I was 3 years old. And that's where my inner child story starts. And it was that inner child that got suppressed and stuffed into the background. And so for 35 years, what I say is that inner child was sometimes quietly trying to get my attention or knock on the door or come out. And that was, for me, what gradually the inner child got louder and louder and said, hey, this isn't right. That isn't right. You are not who you were born to be. So my 3-year-old memory was, I have 2 older sisters who are 4 and 5 years older, and then my dad was a farmer. He was not an educated man. My mom had a high school degree, but my dad was an elder in the church for many years, and they were simply following what they had been taught, right? Spare the rod, spoil the child. The discipline that happened to me, and it was common because they taught it in the church, was spankings with yardsticks and rulers and wooden spoons. And I was locked in a dark cellar a few times. I don't even remember what I did, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember what I did. I remember the punishment. So when I was 3, you're old enough to go to Sunday school for the first time. So they brought me into the Sunday school class, and it was scary. The lady that was the teacher was an older lady, and I just remember I looked at her and she scared me, right? I don't know, her face was all wrinkly, and I'm sure she was a nice enough lady, but she looked angry to me. And I was kind of a quiet, shy kid. I wasn't. I remember hiding behind my dad's leg when we'd take me to the cafe in town, and I was just really kind of introverted and quiet. But I got into that classroom, and I dug my heels in, and I think this is my inner voice talking to me, saying, "I don't want to be here," and I refused to sit at the table with the other children. And I went and sat in the corner and pulled my knees up to my chest and put my head down, and I was crying. And I said, no, I don't want to be here.
Wow.
So in my deconstruction, therapy process, to me, that was my inner true voice saying, this isn't for me, right? This is not who I am. This is not what I want. So they called my dad, came down to the Sunday school room and picked me up and put me in the car and took me home and gave me a good spanking and
for being a scared little child. That's so awful.
Yeah. And then because my dad, our bedrooms were upstairs and we each had our own bedroom, he didn't know which bedroom was mine. And so he put me in my sister's bed and said, "Now you have to stay here. I heard you're a bad boy," from the Sunday school teacher and him. So I was, so that's an early memory, right? In my, you kind of asked about kind of the chinks in the armor or the, So what I say is, throughout my childhood, there were other times, of course, where I was punished or disciplined, either physically or we heard a lot of, shaming. If you were too individual or too outspoken or didn't want to go to church twice on Sunday and Wednesday night, there was just a lot of pressure. So what I say developed is that I call it kind of that Christian ego. Because I was sensitive, I thought, oh shit, I guess I better be a good boy. Right?
Toe the line.
Yeah. So that for me started my, sports kind of saved me, as a good athlete. So I didn't go off into with my anger, drugs or alcohol or all of that. I funneled all of my emotion into basketball, into the sports. And and so all along the way, though, what I feel now is there was this, like I said, idyllic. There was a lot of good times, a lot of fun, a lot of neat things about growing up on a farm and in a small community that were warm and fuzzy, and But now, what I realize is there was always in the background my inner voice, that inner child, and there was a bit of a gray cloud. It's just that I can just describe it as a gray cloud, a bit of darkness in the background. So, yeah, I mean, I have so many stories from 18 years of growing up with all of that. So where to go from here?
Well, I'm wondering about the Bible college you went to that was just close to your town, 8 miles away. Were they kind of the same reform mentality? So you were still receiving the same messaging?
Yeah. So when I was a junior, senior in high school, I was a star basketball player. I was ranked as one of the top players in the state of Iowa, 6'9", 6'10". I had scholarship offers to go to CU, Boulder, Baylor, big Division I schools.
Wow.
And was talented enough to have, gotten those offers. But this is the other piece, is because I was the good Christian person, in the end, it took a while, but I made the decision to stay close to home and go to the Christian college, right?
Mm.
And the Reformed Church has four or five of their own colleges, right? So Northwestern College was one of those. There's two of them in Michigan, I think Calvin and Hope. And then there's another one in Iowa called Central College. So, I was a star player at a small school for 4 years. Was like an All-American NAIA basketball player. But
was there pressure there? Like, did your parents encourage you, well, you really should just go to this Christian college, don't go away to a worldly college?
Yes. In fact, CU Buffaloes flew me out for a recruiting trip, and my mom didn't trust anything outside of Iowa. So she had my brother-in-law, who was married to my sister, go with me.
Yeah.
Because she kind of needed a watchdog, someone to watch to make sure I wasn't influenced too much, in that way. So between the Christian mindset, and then the other factor was I was dating my wife, who was still in high school. And so those two factors kept me kind of in the fold, so to speak, close to home. But yeah, the college is only about 1,000 students, and I got my degree as a teacher and educator, physical education, and then community recreation, kind of a double major. And so yeah, that's that part of the story.
Wow. And then you married your wife. And at some point, the Athletes in Action was through Campus Crusade for Christ. That was all kind of tied together there. Yeah. And then at what point did doubts start entering in for you?
Well, let me tell you a little bit of the story about my wife and college years, right? Because she's part of that. Like, she's kind of part of all this. Her father was a pastor in a different Reformed church only 8 miles from where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that the pastors I had growing up, there were a whole bunch of them. Like, the church couldn't keep the pastor, right? And man, we had some characters. They were screamers. They were yelling from the pulpit. They were fire and brimstone at times. There were some who were quieter. But her father stayed at his church for, I think, 30 years. He was actually a wonderful man. He was kind of quiet, and he was more gentle.
Beloved. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And but here's how my wife and I, when you're dating and you're in a Christian community, the purity culture, is there. Mm-hmm. So when I late high school years and I got to college, of course, your hormones are raging. You want to enjoy sex and sexuality. And I dated my wife, then we broke up for a while. I dated some other girls in college, then we got back together. She came to the college for 1 year. I was a junior and she was a freshman. And we had been dating, of course, in the purity culture, in that Christian, setting. Mm-hmm. We didn't have education about condoms or birth control or any of that. So what you did was a lot of heavy petting, right? And I say Friday and Saturday night were dating night. So there was a lot of heavy petting. Then there was like masturbation, heavy masturbation, I call it, and then heavy guilt.
Oh, that too.
Heavy guilt set in. There's a cycle, right? Kind of the addiction cycle, but heavy guilt set in. And then there was Sunday morning was for heavy confession.
That's right. It is a whole cycle. Repeat it every weekend. Oh my gosh.
And you repeat it. That's right. That's right. And I always said on Sunday morning in the Christian community, Jesus didn't get the day off because he was so busy, answering all the confessions from the Christian college students who had sinned,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But my wife, as a preacher's daughter, what happened, and it happens so much, is the only way you could overcome this guilt was to get married.
Yes.
You could only have sex if you were married. Yeah. So we got married. I mean, we were 20 and she was 19 and I was 20.
Wow. So young.
Yeah. So we got married, and we were pretty compatible. We're completely opposite personalities. So there was some sense where we complemented each other. But I think so because she was a preacher's daughter and she was kind of quieter and her personality was, so all she liked to do was sew. She's a seamstress.
Okay.
Her mother's a home economics teacher. And because her parents generally were pretty gentle and kind, she didn't experience a lot of the same things that I experienced, discipline-wise or fire and brimstone. But she also was not, she preferred, while she sat in church, to draw pictures. She was an artist.
Okay.
She spent her time doing things, not really being there, but doing things, drawing pictures, and then she was a seamstress. So when it came time to go to Campus Crusade for Christ, she did not want to do it at all, right? She didn't want to be married to like another pastoral spiritual person. So she drug her feet, but she went, right? And so through the entire time, her voice was always there for me. Like, I just don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this witnessing stuff. And she didn't, pretty much. She helped me as an administrative assistant with the basketball ministry. I, on the other hand, continued to be the model, Christian leader, athlete, and I became a leader. I have natural leadership abilities. So the things that started to break down, along with that inner voice, an example was when I was with Campus Crusade, one of my coworkers was discovered having a female coworker was discovered that she was having an affair with another woman, and she was lesbian, right? And when they discovered that, they immediately fired her. She was out, right? This was in the early 80s. And I liked her, right? It's like, that's just an example of something. It's like, I thought, this is not right. Like, we're supposed to love people, right? We're supposed to have this love of Jesus in our hearts and our minds. Also, for me to share a testimony about how Jesus changed my life, I was recruited while I was in college by the Fellowship of Christian Athletes because I was a star athlete and had this role model thing that was given to me. I never really liked it, but I figured out that I had to almost make up stories, like
Yep.
testimonies about how Jesus changed my life.
Yeah.
I did it all the time.
Oh my God. It's like a kid getting ready to go to Catholic confession. Oh, I gotta make something up. What am I gonna have there?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So I always had that in the back of my mind as I was going through, but I pushed it away, right? I
Yeah.
pushed it down and I just did it.
Oh.
Um, so that was one of my first experiences with homophobia. And I mean, I grew up with my dad and farmers, you know, they were racist in many ways and making homophobic comments and all of that. I didn't think anything of it because that was part of the culture. But when that happened, you know, I started going back and thinking, yeah, you know, this is not what, you know, this is not right. You know, it's just not right. And so the other thing I saw when we were traveling as a Christian basketball team, there were a couple of times where I didn't do this, but guys on the team would get up at the half court of the basketball game, and they would give one of their teammates testimonies. Like this was a personal thing about how Jesus changed my life. And because we knew each other's stories so well, like just for kicks, they would give somebody else's testimony and share it.
That's not cool. No.
And you know, it's like people were very vulnerable in the audience.
Yes.
They were looking up to us as role models. So all of this just to me started to feel very phony and very, you know, along with the discipline I received growing up and just the hypocrisy that I saw in the elders and the pastors and the deacons. And there's a lot more. But then I got to, Campus Crusade for Christ, we also were pushed to raise money, right?
Oh, yeah.
We had to raise money to support ourselves and the ministry. So I also was raising money, and whenever we would return from a summer tour of tours and trips, we would go back to our home churches, and I started thinking about the language that was used. So when we got off of a crusade, right? That's the first word, right? That gives you a clue. This is war.
Yes.
So we would tell war stories. And we used to have to keep statistics. So if I shared the 4 spiritual laws and my testimony with the maid at the hotel or someone I sat next to on the airplane or 5,000 fans in the stadium or whatever, our war stories were, okay, how many people did you share with on this trip, Phil? And how many of them accepted Christ? And what are some of the conversations you had? And there were war stories. So that didn't sit right with me. Didn't feel good. And there's lots more. So then fast forward to 2 years at Denver Seminary, the Baptist Seminary. So the deeper I got into the theology and church history, I grew up, that Reformed church the foundation was Calvinism. So John Calvin, I was sitting in a class at the seminary, and the professor says, yeah, these guys back in the 1600s, they were pretty serious about their religion. And John Calvin, who's the quotes like Calvinism and catechism, you know, was what I learned. John Calvin either participated in or supported 57 people being tortured and killed.
Oh, that's terrible.
back in the 1500s, and he was a proponent for torture, like that a heretic was supposed to die a slow, painful death.
Awful.
So they did the they would lay someone out on the ground and put a rope on the legs and the hands and the arms and take 4 horses and gallop away and tear the person limb to limb.
Yeah. And Calvin supported that.
Yes.
Oh, that is something I never heard before. Awful.
So that, again, that's more of the story. And I finished up that degree. The psychology part of my degree, they were pretty good. Like it was an excellent academic training that I had. But then for 3 years, my wife and I moved from Colorado to the Seattle area, where I had a mentor, a psychologist, who had a residency program that I went through as a therapist before I got, as I was getting my license. And kind of what happened is I had been an elder in the church as well, in churches, and I had been a leader, and I always jumped in. And I was very zealous and a leader, church, teaching. I even preached sermons. When we moved to Seattle, we got into a church of 5,000 members in Bellevue, Washington.
Wow, that's a big church.
And I was starting on the path. The pastor knew who I was and what my background was, and the pastor started asking me to lead things. And I was getting almost nauseous, like sick to my stomach, because of the inner conflict I was having about what was going on with religion in my mind. And one Sunday morning, I woke up in bed. We were supposed to go to church. And I said to my wife, I'm done. This is it. Not going back. I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. Right? Like, I just can't do this anymore. This is not who I am. And she kind of goes, oh, great. Good. She was she was like waiting for this day, probably for, 15 years.
Wow.
And, of course, kind of the way I do things is different than the way she does things.
Yeah.
She goes, awesome. Now, we had to tell family, right? We had to tell her parents, who's been in the ministry all their life, and my parents. And so we had some rocky times. Those are all different stories. But she kind of just went back to sewing and living her life. And I think there's, she's not one that's going to go to therapy, or anything. She just works everything out with her hands and her sewing and all of that.
Interesting.
I kind of envy that. But I immediately went and got a therapist, and I had 5 friends in Seattle. We were together for about 2 years. Ex-pastors, therapists, all of us had left religion. And we found each other.
Oh.
And so in my therapy, I did a lot of inner child work and healing work, and invited my dad. They flew in from Iowa. I took him ocean fishing. I invited him to come to therapy with me, with my psychologist.
That was bold.
Well, I was struggling with, I loved my parents, but I wanted them to understand why I had left the church.
Did he go with you?
He went with me.
Amazing.
We didn't make any progress. He
Right.
didn't understand.
Yeah.
So we went back. I took them ocean fishing. They went home. We had, some tense moments at times. But my next session, the psychologist said, Phil, I think you're going to need to work on accepting the fact that your parents may die not understanding.
Yes.
And that's what I worked on, for the rest of my time with that psychologist.
And that's huge, because that's something certainly that I hear a lot with my own clients. The hardest apology is the one we never get. And we want our parents to know, you screwed up, or you screwed me up. Those teachings were harmful for me. But that's in our world. They see things very differently in their world.
Now, and this is down the road a ways, and I say this to my own clients, I say, I did love my parents. I do think they did the best they could. They were extremely misguided, and they brought their pain from their childhood and how they were raised and how they were indoctrinated. They passed it on to me. And so they're responsible for that in some sense. And at the same time, I'm able to now I'm able to have some compassion about that, right? And I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but
acceptance, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a big one. That can really trip a lot of us up, particularly if we look at the changes in our thinking and we recognize, oh my God, I've harmed my kids, and we race to apologize to our own kids and just tell them, I'm sorry for everything. And if anything, if you remember anything and I need to apologize for that, please let me know, because I am so sorry. And so when we have that epiphany and our parents do not, it's painful.
Yeah. So the other part of my journey, I don't, how much time do we have left? I'm sorry.
Oh, we're good. We still have 17 minutes.
Okay. The thing that, about a couple of years later, we moved back to Colorado, and I was in private practice as a therapist and licensed there. And I was working on just my own growth and healing. And in 1994, I picked up Marlene Winnell's book,
Leaving the Fold.
Leaving the Fold. And I read it several times. But the other part of my story is that the other book I picked up was Wherever You Go, There You Are by John Kabat-Zinn.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had been so sheltered in the Christian mindset, with Campus Crusade for Christ, they even gave us a list of books that we shouldn't read.
Oh, right? Cult. Yeah, trying to control the information.
Of course, I usually went out and bought some of those books and read them right away.
Excellent.
I had that rebel in me enough,
Mm-hmm.
But what happened for me that helped me was I was able to kind of as I was letting go of Christianity and religion, I was able to grab onto kind of the Eastern way of thinking. And I'm not a Buddhist. I'd call myself, if people need to put me in a box, I'd be agnostic, or I'd be a secular Buddhist, or I'd be something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole concept of the inner self versus the external that is so much part of the Christian world, the inner, listening to my inner voice, meditation, mindfulness, managing my thought lives. That's what I was introduced to through Buddhism. right?
Hey. Mm-hmm.
So it didn't take me long to kind of begin my journey. And so I experienced some loss and some pain from the loss of that warm, fuzzy community feeling that you get with the church.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't last for long, um, because I got to know myself and my inner child and began fairly quickly to listen and to be reacquainted with my inner self.
It's wonderful because that identity piece, it can be so problematic for people when we've had enmeshment between our ideology and our identity. And then we leave the ideology and we are wondering, oh my God, like who am I now? If I'm not that. And it sounds like you got into work right away, exploring yourself and figuring out who you are and how you fit in with the world.
Yeah. And while I was still in Seattle, this group of therapists and ex-pastors, we actually put on a conference. We started an organization called, quotes, Christians in Recovery.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
And so some of that conference, there were some speakers who still had a kind of a Christian mindset, but it was a therapeutic sort of mindset. But we did our little segments on people who had left the fold, so to speak, who had left, and a healing journey there. And we advertised this. One of the people was really good at marketing. We advertised this up and down the West Coast, and we had 1,000 people come.
Oh my! Where did you hold it?
In a big hotel, like in a hotel.
That's fantastic.
In Seattle.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah. And so we did that little thing, we did that big thing. And out of that, of course, I gained a huge number of clients for my private practice, and stayed there for 3 years, and did that. But so that was fun, and it was encouraging, and so my 30-some years, though, of deconstruction, it wasn't just smooth sailing after that. I did a lot of, I was a bit lost off and on, like a lot of job changes, moved my wife, and we had 4 kids.
Oh, wow.
Moved around a lot. I was a bit nomadic, and so there's another whole story about that. But
how did it go? How did your deconstruction go with your kids? Were they teens when you deconstructed? Are some of them still religious, or what happened there?
No, our kids, when I left in 1991, when we left religion, my son was 7 or 8 years old. He's the oldest. And then I have 3 daughters, and they followed in line, 2 years younger, and then 4 years younger, and 5 years younger. So my son and my oldest daughter, they were around when we went to church some. And in fact, here's another one of the chinks. When we were in Colorado Springs, and I was still I was actually at the seminary, but my son was 5 years old, and he was walking down the hallway at the church, and one of the assistant pastors, I don't know what he was doing, but the assistant pastor grabbed him by the ear and twisted his ear to haul him into the classroom, because apparently he was misbehaving. And that was his experience. That's how he experienced religion and church. And he came out, he was crying after church. I said, "What happened?" And I had a couple of words with the pastor, and so the stories go on and on and on just about, that. But my two oldest kids escaped for the most part without too many scars, right?
That's great.
We did start early on. We did spank them a few times, and we used that method. But as a therapist, I just couldn't do it. I changed my ways quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So my kids I'm so proud of them. They're, none of them are religious. I have a daughter who's done like shaman things and yoga and more of a Eastern Hindu Buddhist stuff. I have a daughter who was into Wiccan, off and on for a while, and they've been free to just explore whatever they want.
Wow. So nice.
So I think they're thankful for that. They've expressed that. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. And do you have the kind of relationship with them where, because it sounds like it's a very different relationship than you had with your dad. Could your kids come to you and say, I had this memory from when I was a teenager and I really didn't like this thing that you did, and you would be able to talk about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I've apologized a couple times, talked to them about the fact that I relocated them so often, right? It was probably for some of them, it was the younger ones, almost like living in a military family, because we moved. And I've apologized to them for that. And, they've all come back and said, "Hey, Dad, we're better people for it." Right.
Nice.
We have friends who grew up and never moved, and they said, we can see that they have a difficult time adjusting to things, and we don't. We roll with whatever happens in our life. And so, no, and it's not that they haven't had difficulties. I mean, a couple of them have been married and divorced and then remarried, but even through that, it's like they're doing so well with it. Like they realize that, the relationship was not what it should have been. And
right. And divorce is a transition. It's not a failure.
It's a transition. It's not a sin.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And your kids then managed to have the benefit of not experiencing guilt and condemnation and shame and fear as heaped on by the church and by Christianity in particular. And those are things that you and I both grew up with unhealthy doses of.
Yeah, they kind of look at what I'm doing now with all of this, and they don't fully understand, right? They don't.
Fantastic. That's great.
So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. My mom tries to understand. She's in her 80s, and she still considers herself a woman of faith. She had a much gentler faith than my dad, who was the diehard fundamentalist. She was always the gentle one of the two. And she's trying to understand. And so I say to her, well, I work with people who've left really high demand religions and groups and cults. And she says, oh, well, okay, so that's not me. She says, my Jesus would never, hurt anyone or those sorts of things. And and sometimes I feel like saying, have you looked at your 4 children? Like, if we all bear some scars from that. But then I'm also like, you know what? She's in her 80s. If she feels secure, she's not hurting other people. The closer she gets to the end of things, really needs to feel secure. I don't want her plunged into existential crisis. And so, I just hold her hand and tell her, you were a great mom, and maybe change the subject, or we avoid topics that could be inflammatory, because I love her and I don't want to lose that closeness. And she understands it. So she doesn't make demands on me that I go to church or that anything like that at all. So I'm extremely fortunate in that regard.
Yeah. Well, my wife's mother is 98 years old.
Oh my!
She was a pastor's wife, and She's, we've gotten the comments. My wife's side of the family, it's been a little more difficult because she has 3 siblings who were pastors' kids, and 2 of them, were pretty religious, and one of her other siblings left as well, kind of is out of it pretty much. But, we've gotten the comments about, well, we're sad that we're not going to see you in heaven, and some of those sorts of things. And we just kind of roll with that and change the subject. And, we're not going to get into heated debates with them. There's no reason for that.
I do feel sorry for people who are still entrenched in that mindset, because they are suffering when they hear us say, oh, actually, we don't believe that anymore. It's a terrible thing for them to hear, and they feel so awful about it. And I'm like, I feel great. This is like the best decision I ever made, the best gift I ever gave myself, to start exploring outside of Christianity and no longer be bound by those things. But it definitely can be hard. And some folks, they're not able to maintain those relationships. So I'm glad you folks have been, even though, sometimes there have been some stings and barbs there, and you don't play the game. You just don't fall into it and get sucked into it.
Exactly. Yeah. So
nice. Wow. This has been just so interesting. Thanks for sharing about your life and your journey and your deconstruction and your reconstruction, which is the other very important element. And so I'm just so curious, what drew you to Nevada?
About what?
What drew you to Nevada? What made you move there?
The cost of living is cheap here. It's a good state to retire in financially.
Okay.
The other thing is, I have a daughter in Sacramento. I have a sister in Southern California. I have 2 kids in Colorado. So we're in a central location for traveling. And we had 2 daughters in California, and one of them kind of blew our plan and moved to Minnesota recently. But but we kind of were locating in a central location. But you mentioned the Mormon. We're in the middle of Mormon country here, being so close to Utah, and so I've already met a number of individuals here in social settings that are ex-Mormons, and dealing with their life that way. So it's kind of interesting, but yeah, it's a change. I think we'll be here for quite a while. We're going to travel in the summertime because it got to 118 degrees.
Oh my gosh.
In July and August. And so we have a travel trailer, and we'll go to cool places for a couple months in the summer and travel.
Literally and figuratively, go to some cool places. That's awesome. Oh, that is just wonderful. Well, how can people get a hold of you?
So I have my website that's just been launched not long ago at peaceandcontentmentcoaching.com. And my email is on there. It's just phil@peaceandcontentmentcoaching.com. And I'm gonna, like I said, launch into the coaching thing, and I'll do a 20 or 30 minute free discovery call. I have some inkling about starting groups, that kind of thing. But for now, I just want to provide a safe, supportive place for people to heal and to kind of process what they're going through. I'm already doing I'd say a third of my caseload with my telehealth are people who are deconstructing or have been abused spiritually. And so I'm already been doing that work for a long time.
Excellent. Wow. Please be sure to recommend this YouTube channel, the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel, because I have many videos from ex-Mormons and people who've left all sorts of fundamentalist religious backgrounds. And it's just a great free resource that's helpful to people who are on their deconstruction journey. And that's where our video here, our interview, will be posted.
Okay.
And I just want to thank you again for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. And I appreciate what you're doing. I've been watching your podcasts and listening, and some others. I'm encouraged I feel like my world is opening up with the community of people like yourself who are doing this work. I think it's just growing and growing and growing. And I'm so appreciative of what you do as well. And I'm encouraged by that. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. And a big shout out to Dr. Marlene Winnell, whose book is Leaving the Fold. And I recommend that book so highly to everyone, because it's just a really helpful book for those of us who have left high demand fundamentalist religions and groups. And I want to thank you for tuning in and for joining us today. Please be sure to like and subscribe the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel. And I'll see you all again soon. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.